Alright, so we got this thing all power washed and relatively clean, just so we can start working on it. The next step to try and get at the engine itself, to try and get anything done, is take the hood off, which is a pretty easy operation on one of these. You know, if you have a different model or something, maybe you could actually get at the engine without taking the hood off. But we're going to take this one off just so we can see a lot better to work on everything. This one here had just a couple screws to take out. There's a bolt here, 10 millimeter. There was a Phillips head screw that went through here just to hold it onto the dashboard tower. And then there was a bolt coming up through the bottom of the frame here, and the same thing over there in that little captive nut. Those were 13 millimeter. But like I said, every tractor will be a little bit different. It doesn't have to necessarily be this one here. So we got all those 6 bolts taken out, and the last thing you'll have to remember is if you have headlights, there's going to be obviously electric power going to them. So most in every tractor I think I've ever seen has a harness connector that you can take off right here at the frame. It's real simple, just has 2 little squeeze terminals. You just separate it, and that way everything should be disconnected. Just make sure that you don't see any other brackets or any other wires or anything. And then basically all we have to do is just check this, rock it up, make sure everything's clear, and then take the whole hood off of the tractor. And we'll just set that aside. So now what we're left with is a nice open area where we can access pretty much all points of the engine that are going to concern us here. Here you have the starter over here. One thing you want to check on the starter before we even get into anything is make sure that the power cable is on and is tight on the actual starter lug. This can get rusted, oxidized. You may have to take that off and clean it with a wire brush, and spray some battery terminal cleaner on it, just to make sure it makes a good contact, because even if you put a fresh battery in, if that starter terminal was all gunked up, it's not going to transfer power to the starter and give you a reliable start, if a start at all. Here we see this is a single cylinder, like I said. Spark plug comes out on this side of the valve cover right here by the exhaust. So we can pull that out, take a look at the spark plug, clean it up, replace it. It's a good idea to just replace it because we don't know the history or how long it's been since that thing's ever been touched. And then we swing over to this side. This is where we're going to be working today. This is the carburetor itself. And we're going to start off by just taking a look in at this air cleaner. See what we're looking at here. Just pull this cover off. And then it has the air cleaner in here with a big rubber seal. And this actually looks pretty brand new. If your air cleaner is clogged up, all black and gray, brown, covered with stuff, you're gonna at least want to try and blow it out before we try and start this. This is another item that if the motor doesn't run, don't go out and just buy a new air cleaner. We just gotta see if we can get this thing to run before we get into the tune-up phase. This is what they call a pre-filter. It's just a little foam thing. Sometimes you spray a little oil or WD-40 on it to get the dirt to stick to it, because this is the last line of defense you have before it goes into your actual air filter with any bigger particles. So, and then we have some stuff that just didn't get caught by the pre-filter, which is a good thing because it didn't make it into the engine. So we'll take an air compressor and just dust this stuff off, clean it off, after we get done taking this carburetor apart. So as we can see, the first thing we're going to want to do when we take this carburetor off is take the fuel line off. The fuel line also has a little inline filter that can look like this. I've also seen them where you can actually see the fuel in them. Sometimes they're white, a little bit bigger, so they hold more media for filtering. But they all do the same job. You can run down and find these. Any hardware store pretty much has these in the little small engine section. It's just a little stab-in filter that goes in line. We'll take these clamps off with a pair of needle nose pliers, slide them off, and pull the fuel line off of the carburetor here. There's a couple other things that I'll show you that we're gonna have to disconnect like some throttle linkage arms when we actually get to pulling this apart, but that'll be step one. And then there's also, on newer engines, there is an electrical connector on the bottom of the fuel bowl that you're gonna have to take off, or at least separate the power wires from. That's a fuel shut-off solenoid. So basically they put these on as sort of an emissions preventative deal. When you would shut the engine off, if raw fuel would enter the combustion chamber and go out the exhaust and ignite and cause what they call a backfire. I'm sure you've seen old cars shut off, or people shut off their lawn equipment and it pops really loud with a little flame out the exhaust when they shut the engine off. They just eliminated the fuel from going into the carburetor when the ignition shut off to prevent that, just as a, you know, a fire safety type of measure. So you need to have it actually connected and operating, because if you don't, fuel won't be able to enter the carburetor to make the engine run. So all that does is when you turn the key on, there's a little plunger in here that'll retract to kind of allow the fuel to flow in. So it doesn't do anything while the engine's running other than just stay retracted with a little magnet and a spring in here. And then when you shut that off, the spring actuates because the magnet shuts off, and it closes the plunger to stop the fuel from flowing. So that's a lot about nothing about what a fuel solenoid is, but a little tip of the day here. So we're gonna start trying to take this apart.